We've all heard the name, the stories, the legends, the HMS Bounty, but what was it really like back then in 1830? It was a different world, and I intend to take you there so you can feel the spray of the salt on your cheek, so you can see just how tough and how intense it was in those times. I want all your questions about the HMS Bounty and life and everything in this short and entertaining video. In 1830, a number of the crew of the HMS Bounty, under the leadership of the ship's mate, Fletcher Christian, rebelled and classed their Lieutenant Bligh and a number of men loyal to him adrift in an open boat on the seven seas. It was 20 years after the mutiny that news first came to Britain of what had happened to Fletcher Christian, the lead instigator of the mutiny, and the remaining mutineers, and the ship, the Bounty itself. An American vessel, the Topaz, made a landing on the Pacific island of Pitcairn, and they discovered a small but flourishing community under the charge of one Alexander Smith. It turned out to be the same person as John Adams, once a member of the Bounty's crew. The island was well ruled and inhabited by handsome and cheerful young people, descendants of the Bounty's men, and of the Tahitian women who had accompanied them. Smith willingly told the visitors how the island had been colonized. This out-of-the-way and inaccessible isle had been deliberately picked by Christian. Finding no good anchorage close to the island, and the Bounty being too weakly manned again to entrust themselves and her at sea, Christian determined to run her aground until a small creek against the cliff. This was in order to make it easier to get such articles as may be of use or necessary for establishing a settlement on the island from her, and to land the pigs, goats, and poultry that they had brought from Otaheite. Having accompanied this point, he ordered the Bounty to be set ablaze, with the view probably of preventing any escape from the island, and also to remove an object that, if seen, might excite the curiosity of some passing vessel and thus be the means of revealing their hiding place. Christian's plan succeeded, and by Adam's account, everything went on smoothly for a short while, but it was clear enough that this misguided and ill-fated young fellow was never happy after the rash and criminal step he had taken in hijacking the boat. He was always sullen and morose, and committed so many acts of wanton oppression that he very soon incurred the hatred and detestation of his companions in crime. It seemed indeed that he practiced that same overbearing conduct over them of which he had accused their commander Bligh. The object he had in view when he last left Otaheite had now been accomplished. He had discovered an uninhabited isle away from the common route of ships, and had established himself and his associates there. So far there was a chance that he had escaped or pursued, but there was no escaping from his own nature. The fate of this misguided young man, brought on by his ill treatment both of his associates and the Otaheitians he had carried off with him, was such as might be expected. He was shot by an Otaheitian while digging in his field, about 11 months after they had settled on the island. His death was only the start of feuds and killings, which ended in the total destruction of the whole party, except for Adams and Young. By Adams' account, the settlers from this time became divided into two parties, and their grievances and quarrels procured to such a height that each took every opportunity of putting the other to death. Old John Adams was himself shot through the neck, but the ball entered the fleshy part only, and he was able to make his escape and avoid the fury of his assailants. The immediate cause of Christian's murder was his having forcibly seized the wife of one of the Otahitian men, which so angered the rest that they not only sought his life, but those of others who might, they thought, be disposed to pursue the same course. Christian was a gentleman by birth and an officer in His Majesty's service, and was always so addressed. But why was he murdered within 2 years? One account says only 9 months after the party reached the island. The reason was his inability to lead the community and his oppression of the Otahitians. That Christian was always uneasy in his mind about his own safety is proved by his having selected a cave at the very top of the high ridge of craggy hills that runs across the island as his intended place of refuge. In the event of any ship of war discovering the hiding place of the mutineers, he was resolved to retreat up to this cave and to sell his life as dearly as he could. In this recess he always kept a store of provisions, and near it he built a small hut, well concealed by trees, which served the purpose of a watch house. So difficult, said one visitor to the scene, was the approach to this cave that even if a party was successful in crossing the ridge, they might have bid defiance as long as ammunition lasted to any force. The reflection of his having sent adrift to die on the wide ocean for no other outcome was likely. No fewer than 19 men, all of whom one only excepted were innocent of any offence towards him, must have constantly haunted his mind and left him scarce disposition to be happy or cheerful. The conclusion. Many useful and solitary lessons of conduct may be drawn from this eventful history, more especially by officers of the Navy, both old and young, as well as by those subordinate to them. In the first place, it most strongly points out the dreadful consequences that are almost certain to ensue from a state of insubordination and mutiny on board a ship of war, and the equally certain fact that, at one time or other, awaits all those who have the misfortune to be concerned in the transaction of this revolting nature. In the present instance, the dreadful retribution which overtook them, and which was evinced in a most extraordinary manner affords an awful and instructive lesson to seamen. From it they may learn that, although the guilty may be secured for a time in evading the punishment due to the offended laws of society, yet they may not hope to escape the pursuit of divine vengeance. It will be recollected that the number of persons who remained in the Bounty after her piratical seizure, and who were charged with the crime of mutiny, was 25. That these subsequently separated into 2 parties, 16 having landed at Otaheite, and afterwards taken from thence in the Pandora as prisoners, and 9 having gone with the Bounty to Pitcairn's Island. Of the 16 men taken in the Pandora, Mr. Peter Haywood, midshipman, was sentenced to death, but pardoned, and later became a distinguished captain in the Royal Navy. James Morrison, boatswain's mate, was sentenced to death, but pardoned. William Musprat, commander steward, was sentenced to death, but pardoned. Thomas Burkitt, seaman, condemned and executed. John Millwood, seaman, condemned and executed. Thomas Allison, seaman, condemned and executed. Joseph Coleman, armourer, tried and acquitted. Charles Normand, carpenter's mate, tried and acquitted. Thomas McIntosh, carpenter's crew, tried and acquitted. Michael Byrne, seaman, tried and acquitted. Mr. George Stewart, midshipman, drowned aboard the HMS Pandora. John Sumner, seaman, drowned aboard the HMS Pandora. Richard Skinner, seaman, drowned aboard the HMS Pandora. Henry Hilbert, cooper, drowned aboard the HMS Cooper. Charles Churchill, Marcher at Arms, murdered by one Matthew Thompson. Matthew Thompson, seaman, murdered by Churchill's friends in Otaheite. The 9 who landed on Pitcairn Island. Mr. Fletcher Christian, acting lieutenant, murdered. Mr. John Williams, seaman, murdered. Isaac Martin, murdered. John Mills, gunner's mate, murdered. William Brown, botanist assistant, murdered. Matthew Quintale, seaman, put to death by Young and Adams in self-defense. William McCoy, seaman, became insane and killed himself by throwing himself from a rock. Mr. Edward Young, midshipman, died of asthma. Alexander Smith, alias John Adams, seaman, died a natural death in 1829.